Right now, your purchases are scattered across dozens of databases. The bank sees one thing, the tax office sees another, and your internet service provider sees something else entirely. To get a complete picture of your life, you need a warrant, time, and a reason. But in a few years, all of this will be in one registry. Every penny, every purchase, and there is only one technology that has not been brought under control. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I will tell you why pure mathematics is the last thing standing between you and total surveillance. But to understand how we got to this point, we need to go back to the very beginning. To the 1990s, when the internet was still young, and the people who understood its true power could fit in one room. In 1992, 3 people gathered in a small room in San Francisco. Tim May, a former engineer at Intel, Eric Hughes, a mathematician from Berkeley, and John Gilmore, one of the first employees of Sun Microsystems. They were neither hackers nor criminals. They were people who saw the future before others did, and that future frightened them. Their idea was simple but radical. In an era when all communication was gradually becoming digital, privacy could no longer be based on trust in the state. It had to be ensured technically, through mathematics, through code. Thus was born a movement that would later be called cypherpunk. Their manifesto, written by Hughes, was only a few paragraphs long, but the main idea was this: privacy is not secrecy. Secrecy is when no one knows what you have done. Privacy is when you decide for yourself who to tell about it. And the only reliable way to protect this right in the digital world is encryption. They didn't attend rallies. They didn't write petitions. Their slogan was different. CryptoPunks write code, and they wrote it. One of those who took this call literally was Phil Zimmerman, a programmer from Colorado, an activist in the nuclear disarmament movement, a man who believed that technology could protect people from tyranny. In 1991, he created a program that changed the course of history. It was called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, a modest name for a tool that gave ordinary people access to military-grade encryption for the first time. Before PGP, strong cryptography was the privilege of governments, armies, secret services. Ordinary people couldn't even encrypt an email so that it couldn't be read by someone in the middle. Zimmerman changed that. He uploaded PGP to the internet on the 6th of June 1991 and sent the link to a few friends. Within a week, thousands had downloaded the program. Within a month, tens of thousands. PGP spread across the network like a virus, and it was impossible to stop it. And then began what would later be called the First Cryptographic War. Well, here's the thing. The fact is that under the laws of the United States at that time, strong encryption was equated with weapons. Literally, cryptographic software was on the same list as missile systems and combat aircraft. The export of encryption outside the United States was regulated by the same rules as the export of ammunition. And Zimmerman, by uploading PGP to the open internet, effectively exported weapons to every country in the world at once. A criminal investigation was launched against him. For 3 years, the FBI and the Department of Justice tried to prosecute him for violating the Arms Export Control Act. He faced up to 10 years in prison, but the CryptoPunks responded as best they could with code and ingenuity. They printed the full source code of PGP in the form of a book, an ordinary paper book. Because books are protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, freedom of speech, you can take a book out of the country. You cannot take ammunition out of the country. But if ammunition is printed on paper, it becomes freedom of speech. This book was sent abroad, where it was scanned, the text was recognized, and it was compiled back into a working program. The government found itself trapped by its own laws. At the same time, the Clinton administration made another attempt at control. In 1993, a project called Clipper Chip was launched, an encryption microchip for telephones that was supposed to become the standard. It sounded reasonable, secure communication for everyone, but there was a catch. Each chip had a built-in backdoor, a hidden key that was stored by the government. If the special services needed to listen in on your conversation, they could decrypt it at any time, without your knowledge, without a court order. Cryptographers raised the alarm. The public gradually realized the scale of the problem, and in 1996, researchers at Bell Labs discovered a critical vulnerability in the chip's design itself, which allowed the backdoor to be bypassed and made eavesdropping pointless. The Clipper Chip project was buried. But the decisive blow was dealt not by an engineer or a programmer, but by a mathematician. Daniel Bernstein, a graduate student from Chicago, filed a lawsuit against the United States government. His argument was simple. Mathematical code is a form of speech, and speech is protected by the Constitution. The court agreed. The decision in Bernstein versus Department of Justice set a precedent that effectively legalized the distribution of encryption in America. By the year 2000, export restrictions on cryptography had been lifted. The investigation against Zimmerman was closed without charges being brought. The cypherpunks had won. But here's the thing. They won the battle for encryption of correspondence, for data protection, for the right to privacy in communications. However, there was one question that remained unresolved, a question that had tormented them from the very beginning, from the first messages in the cypherpunk mailing list: how to create money that cannot be traced. They tried. David Chaum created DigiCash back in 1989. Wei Dai described the concept of B-money in 1998. Nick Szabo developed the idea of BitGold. Adam Back invented Hashcash, a proof-of-work system that would later form the basis of Bitcoin. But none of these projects really took off. And then, in 2008, a letter appeared on a cryptography forum from a person whom no one knew. His name was Satoshi Nakamoto, and he claimed to have solved a problem that had stumped the best minds in cryptography for 20 years. He was not mistaken, but what came of it turned out to be quite different from what the CryptoPunks had hoped for. Chapter 2: The Transparent Trap. On the 3rd of January 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto launched the Bitcoin network. The first block, the first transaction, the beginning of a new era, an idea that the world's best cryptographers had been unable to realize for 20 years finally came to fruition. Decentralized digital money without banks, without intermediaries, without government control. The world of cryptography rejoiced. It seemed that the dream of cypherpunks had finally become a reality. Money that cannot be frozen, confiscated, or traced. But the last point, about impossible to track, turned out to be the biggest illusion in the history of digital finance. To understand why, you need to understand one simple thing. Bitcoin is a public ledger. Every transaction, every sender and recipient address, every amount, all of this is recorded in the blockchain and remains there forever. It is publicly accessible for everyone. It is as if every bank transaction you make were posted on a notice board in the city center. Yes, instead of your name, there is a long string of characters. But this string of characters is not a mask. It is thin glass through which everything can be seen if desired. At first, it didn't matter. Bitcoin was used by enthusiasts, programmers, and idealists. The amounts were small, and the interest of the special services was minimal. But everything changed in 2011 when Silk Road appeared, the first large market on the Darknet that accepted payment in Bitcoin. Drugs, fake documents, hacking tools, everything was sold for anonymous cryptocurrency. Its founder, known by the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts, was convinced that Bitcoin made him invulnerable. He was mistaken, and his mistake cost him his freedom. I won't go into detail about the history of Silk Road. It deserves a separate issue. I'll just say one thing. It was its collapse that showed the whole world that Bitcoin is not an anonymous currency. It's the perfect dossier. The FBI tracked more than 700,000 Bitcoins linked to Silk Road. Every coin, every transfer, every wallet, everything was recorded in the blockchain, and none of it went anywhere. All the special services had to do was link the addresses to real people. And to do that, companies emerged that turned Bitcoin's transparency into a weapon. The main one was Chainalysis. It was founded in 2014 in New York by Michael Groniger and Jonathan Levin. These two individuals understood one simple thing. If every Bitcoin transaction is public, then it is possible to build a map of all cash flows in the world of cryptocurrencies and sell this map to those who are willing to pay the most for it: governments. Their technology works something like this. Imagine a huge social network, but instead of people, there are wallets, and instead of friendships, there are transfers. Chainalysis learned to group wallets belonging to the same owner, track where the money goes after each transaction, and compare all this with data from exchanges where users undergo identity verification. One visit to an exchange with your passport, and the entire chain of your anonymous transfers is linked to your name. By 2025, Chainalysis was serving more than half of Europe's police departments. The FBI, Europol, the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, and dozens of other agencies around the world. Their software was called Reactor, and that name perfectly described its essence. A reactor that turned a murky stream of cryptocurrency transactions into a clear, readable map, and the results were not long in coming. In 2021, the DarkSide Group attacked the Colonial Pipeline, which supplies fuel to nearly half of the eastern United States. The company paid a ransom of approximately $5 million in Bitcoin. The hackers believed they were safe, but the FBI, using blockchain analytics tools, tracked the movement of funds through the wallet chain and recovered most of the ransom within a few weeks. In 2023, an even more telling incident occurred. The hacker group, Scattered Spider, attacked a casino in Las Vegas and received a ransom of $15 million in Bitcoin. They divided the money, transferred part of it via a blockchain bridge to another network, and attempted to withdraw it through a little-known exchange. The FBI saw their every move. Chainalysis Reactor graphs recorded every transfer, every branch, every attempt to cover their tracks. The funds were frozen on the bridge and then blocked on the exchange. The criminals were sitting on money they couldn't spend, like a pile of marked bills. Attorney General Lisa Monaco announcing the largest financial seizure in the history of the Department of Justice. The return of $3.5 billion in Bitcoin stolen from the Bitfinex exchange said something that put an end to the myth of anonymity. Cryptocurrency is not a safe haven for criminals, and she was right. At least as far as Bitcoin is concerned. By the mid-2000s, the picture had become crystal clear. Every coin ever sent through the Bitcoin network left an indelible mark. blockchain analytics companies had become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Governments gained a tool they could only have dreamed of before: the ability to see every financial flow, every connection, every transaction in real time. Bitcoin became not a shield from surveillance, but its best friend. But deep in the internet, among those who remembered the original ideals of cypherpunks, another idea was brewing. If Bitcoin is a failure of privacy, then something else is needed, something built differently. From scratch, by different rules. And in 2014, when the world had yet to realize the extent of Bitcoin's transparency, a group of anonymous developers released a cryptocurrency that promised the impossible: transactions that could not be traced at all. Not because the traces were hidden, but because they did not exist. On April 18, 2014, a post appeared on the Bitcoin Talk forum that did not attract much attention. An anonymous user under the nickname thankful_for_today presented a project called Monero, a fork of the little-known CryptoNote protocol. The idea was ambitious, but the author quickly lost the trust of the community. He made decisions on his own, ignored suggestions from developers, and delayed updates. After a few weeks, a group of participants simply took the project away from him. They renamed the coin, removing the prefix bit from the name. Only one word remained. In Esperanto, it meant coin: Monero. From the outset, this project was built according to different rules. No visionary founder, no company behind it, no ICO, and no pre-sale of coins to developers. Just a group of cryptographers who wanted to do what Bitcoin couldn't: create money that really couldn't be traced. To do this, they used 3 mathematical tools, each of which closed a specific gap in the system. The first tool is ring signatures. They resolve the question, who sent the money? In Bitcoin, when you send a transfer, the blockchain clearly shows which wallet debited the funds. It's as if you were paying by card in a shop, and the receipt printed not only what you bought, but also your full bank account number. Monero works differently. When you send a transaction, the system automatically takes 15 random third-party transactions from the blockchain and mixes them with yours into a single ring. All 16 look exactly the same. It is mathematically proven that it is impossible to determine which one is real. It is as if 16 people signed one check at the same time, and no expert in the world could tell whose signature was real. The second tool is hidden addresses. They solve another problem. Who is the money sent to? In Bitcoin, if someone transfers funds to you, anyone can see the address they were sent to. And if that address has ever been linked to your name, for example through an exchange, your entire transaction history becomes an open book. In Monero, every time someone sends you money, the system generates a completely new, one-time address. This address exists only for one transaction and is never repeated. Even if you know the recipient's public address, you cannot find their transactions on the blockchain. It's as if you had a different postbox every day, and no one, including the postman, knew which of the thousands of boxes belonged to you. The third tool is Ring CT, Ring Confidential Transactions. They conceal the last element, the transfer amount. Even if it is impossible to identify the sender and recipient, the amount may reveal a connection between transactions. If someone sent exactly 3 whole and 478 thousandths of a coin, and an hour later, someone received exactly 3 whole and 478 thousandths, the coincidence is too precise to be accidental. Ring CT solves this problem with the help of so-called Pedersen commitments. The system mathematically proves that the sum of the inputs equals the sum of the outputs. meaning that no one has created money out of thin air, but the actual figures remain completely hidden. No observer can see exactly how much has been transferred. 3 layers of protection: sender hidden, recipient hidden, amount hidden. And all of this works by default. Every transaction on the Monero network is automatically anonymous, without any additional settings. Unlike some other coins, where privacy is an option that needs to be enabled manually, here it is built into the very DNA of the system. In addition, Monero utilized the Dandelion++ protocol, an algorithm that conceals the sender's IP address when transmitting transactions to the network. Before your transaction enters the general pool, it is randomly transmitted through several nodes, making it impossible to determine where it originally came from. When blockchain analytics specialists first encountered Monero, they realized that their tools were useless. Chainalysis, which by that point was tracking virtually the entire Bitcoin world, publicly admitted that it did not include Monero in its analytical products. Their programs were able to work with Dash and Zcash, other so-called private coins, but not with Monero, because Dash and Zcash only hid data at the user's request. Monero hid everything, always, without exception, and then the government decided to take a different path. In September 2020, the United States Internal Revenue Service, IRS, announced an open competition. The prize, $625,000. The task, to create a tool capable of breaking Monero's privacy, $500,000 for a working prototype, and another $125,000 after successful testing. It was not just a generous reward, it was a public admission. The richest government in the world had signed off on its own powerlessness in the face of mathematics. 2 companies responded to the contract: Chainalysis and Integra FEC. At the same time, another firm, CipherTrace, announced that it had already created a Monero tracking tool for the Department of Homeland Security. The news spread like wildfire across all cryptocurrency publications, but the Monero community reacted skeptically, and not without reason. The director of CipherTrace himself admitted in an interview that their approach is probabilistic. He said that with Monero, it is not possible to be as accurate as with Bitcoin. It is more of a game of probabilities. One can say that there is a 98% probability that the money went from this address to that one, or a 78% probability. But nothing can be guaranteed. And in criminalistics, probably is not proof. It is an assumption. And no court will pass sentence based on an assumption. Years passed. The IRS contracts expired. None of the contractors presented public evidence that Monero had been hacked. Not a single court case where the de-anonymization of Monero transactions would have been key evidence. Not one. And then, in 2024, a leak occurred. An internal Chainalysis video was leaked online, a presentation for the tax service in which the company demonstrated how it allegedly tracks Monero transactions. The video spread across cryptocurrency forums instantly. The Monero community studied the materials and quickly figured out the method. It turned out that Chainalysis did not hack the math. They took a detour. The company deployed its own nodes on the Monero network, essentially proxy servers that recorded the IP addresses of everyone who connected to them. A former member of the Magic Monero Fund Committee called them fake proxy nodes. The method did not work against cryptography, but against users who did not run their own nodes and connected to someone else's. This is an important point. Monero's mathematics was not broken. The people who used it carelessly were broken. It's like buying the most secure safe in the world, but leaving the code on a piece of paper stuck to the door. The safe is not to blame. In Finland, The National Bureau of Investigation stated that it was able to track Monero transactions in the case of a hacker named Julius Kivimaki. But upon closer inspection, it turned out that investigators were not tracking Monero itself, but rather the moment of conversion from Bitcoin to Monero, the entry point where anonymity had not yet taken effect. Once again, it was not mathematics that was compromised, but human error. Monero's cryptography held firm, but those who were paid to control every financial flow on the planet were not going to give up. If you can't break the technology, you can break access to it, and that is precisely what they attempted to do. On February 6, 2024, Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, announced that it was discontinuing support for Monero. No court ruling, no guilty verdict, no evidence linking the coin to specific crimes, just delisting, removal, as if Monero had never existed on their platform. A few months later, OKX followed Binance, then Huobi, and in October of the same year, Kraken, one of the oldest and most respected exchanges, announced that it would stop trading Monero for all users in the European Economic Area. The deadline for withdrawing funds was 31st December 2024. After that date, all remaining Monero balances were automatically converted to Bitcoin at the market rate. Kraken's wording sounded almost apologetic. We did not take this decision lightly. But the reason was simple: regulatory pressure that was impossible to resist. In December 2024, the MiCA, Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation, came into full force in the European Union. Along with updated anti-money laundering rules, this law explicitly prohibited cryptocurrency services from offering private coins to customers. It did not restrict them. It did not regulate them. It prohibited them. Patrick Hansen, Circle's Director of Strategy in Europe, explained it bluntly. The new rules do not allow crypto platforms to work with coins that provide transaction anonymity. According to data from the Kaiko Analytics platform, in 2024, there were 60 delistings of private coins from various exchanges, more than in any other year since 2021. Monero suffered the most, with the number of its delistings increasing sixfold. But here's what's remarkable. None of these exchanges removed Monero because it was used in a specific crime. None cited legal proceedings. The reason in all cases was the same. We cannot comply with the law because the architecture of this coin does not allow us to collect the data that is required of us. Think about it. The technology wasn't banned because it was dangerous. It was banned because it worked too well. Riccardo Spagni, one of the most prominent developers in the Monero ecosystem, commented on this from a perspective that many found paradoxical. He stated that if Chainalysis could indeed track Monero, regulators would actually want the coin to remain on exchanges. This is because an exchange with identity verification is the ideal entry point for surveillance. They are removing Monero not because it is dirty, but because it is a blind spot. They cannot see what is happening with it, and that is what scares them the most. On the Monero network, in 2024 and 2025, on the Monero network in 2024 and 2025, remained consistently higher than the levels recorded prior to 2022. Delistings did not kill demand, they redirected it. Users moved to decentralized exchanges, platforms such as Uniswap and similar ones, where there is no central operator, no identity verification procedure, and where the decision to list a coin is made not by a board of directors, but by a smart contract. Part of the volume has flowed to less regulated platforms. According to Kaiko, the Poloniex and Yobit exchanges accounted for almost 40% of all private coin trading at that time. In 2021, this figure was only 18%, and an even more telling shift has taken place on the Darknet. According to TRM Labs, by 2025, 48% of all new trading platforms on the Darknet accepted payments exclusively in Monero. Not Bitcoin and Monero, only Monero. This was a record figure, and it meant one thing. Those who really need anonymity made their choice long ago. A strange picture emerged. Regulators pushed Monero out of the legal world. But instead of stifling the technology, they only confirmed its value. The ban became the best advertisement. Each delisting screamed, "This coin works so well that we don't know what to do with it." But while this battle for anonymous cryptocurrencies was going on, something else was brewing behind the scenes, something much more ambitious than delisting a single coin. Governments weren't just fighting private money. They were creating a replacement for it, their own digital currency, fully controlled, fully transparent, and fully subordinate to the state. This is what they call central bank digital currency, and it is what could change the very nature of money forever. Remember how I started this story? Your data is scattered across dozens of databases. The bank sees one thing, the tax office sees another. To get the full picture, you need a warrant, time, and a reason. So here's the thing, there are people who want to change that. And they're not hackers. They're not criminals. They're central banks. As of 2025, more than 130 countries around the world, representing 98% of global GDP, were actively developing or testing their own digital currencies. They are called CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. Behind this dry bureaucratic term lies what is perhaps the most radical change in the nature of money in the last few centuries. The idea sounds reasonable on the surface. Cash is dying out. People are paying with paper money less and less. Digital payments are on the rise. It is logical that the state wants to offer its own version of digital money, stable, reliable, and independent of private companies such as Visa or MasterCard. The digital dollar, a digital euro, a digital yuan. But the devil is in the architecture. When you pay with cash, no one knows what you bought. The banknote passes from hand to hand and leaves no trace. This is not a bug. It is a feature that has existed for thousands of years and that people have come to regard as normal. CBDCs are different. By their very nature, they are centralized digital registries where every transaction made by every citizen can be seen by the issuer, that is, the state. Not can be requested through the courts, not can be obtained by order, but visible, by default, in real time. And this is not a theoretical threat. It is already happening. China was the first to launch a pilot project for the digital yuan. By 2024, more than 180 million personal digital yuan wallets had been opened in the country. 180 million citizens whose purchases, transfers, and savings are potentially visible to the People's Bank of China in real time, a scale that no special service in history has ever dreamed of. But China is China, you might say, an authoritarian regime. They have different rules. What about Europe? The European Central Bank is actively developing a digital euro. In December 2024, the second report on the progress of preparations was published. The plans are ambitious. A pilot launch is possible as early as 2027, with a full launch by 2029. The estimated cost of the project is 1.3 billion euros for development and another 320 million euros annually for support. The ECB promises high standards of privacy. But when you start to look into the details, the picture looks different. the ECB's data protection specialist, published an article entitled "Making the Digital Euro Truly Private." It sounds promising until you read the content. The gist was that the digital euro could be private, but the specific parameters of privacy would be determined by legislators. Not technology, not mathematics, legislators. In other words, people who can change their minds. And there is reason to reconsider, because CBDC is not just digital money, it is programmable money. Imagine a currency with built-in rules. The government can set a limit on how much you can store in your digital wallet. It can freeze your account with a click of a button. No trial, no notice. It can restrict what you are allowed to spend your money on. It could set an expiry date for your money, spend it by the end of the month, or it will burn up. It could track every purchase you make in real time, from a cup of coffee to a plane ticket. These are not fantasies. These are functions that are discussed in official documents of central banks. One of the project's critics, Professor Patrick Schuffel from the Swiss Business School in Fribourg, put it this way: with the CBDC infrastructure, technology will be deployed that can be used for surveillance and control in a way that no other technology in human history has ever been used. He added that not only will every purchase from birth to death be recorded in a permanent digital register, but any payment can be blocked at the touch of a button. Schuffel recalled that similar promises of security were made regarding GPS, mobile data, facial recognition systems, and biometric databases, and each of these technologies was ultimately used by governments against their own citizens. But not all countries are following this path in the same way. In July 2025, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill called the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. The name speaks for itself. The bill prohibits the Federal Reserve from issuing a digital dollar directly to citizens without congressional approval. Congressman Tom Emmer, the author of the bill, said that unelected bureaucrats should never be able to unilaterally issue digital currency or turn the digital dollar into a weapon against our freedoms. The bill still awaits consideration in the Senate. Its fate is undecided, but the very fact that it passed through the House of Representatives shows that even within the most powerful government in the world, there are people who see a threat. And in Europe? A survey conducted in March 2025 showed that 58% of European citizens consider it unlikely that they will use the digital euro for everyday payments. More than half. People don't want this money, but no one asks them. And this is where the circle closes. On the one hand, there are governments that ban anonymous cryptocurrencies and build systems of total financial transparency. On the other hand, there is mathematics, which makes this transparency technically impossible. Between them are ordinary people who do not yet realize what is at stake. Cypherpunks warned about this 30 years ago. Their words turned out to be prophetic, but they also left us with tools to fight back. The question is whether we will be able to use them in time. This story began in 1992, when 3 people in San Francisco decided that mathematics could protect freedom better than the law. They were right. Their ideas survived lawsuits, export bans, backdoor chips, and 3 decades of attempts to bring encryption under control. Then Bitcoin came along, and people believed they had obtained anonymous money. They were mistaken. Bitcoin turned out to be not a shield, but a mirror. It showed everything to everyone. The special services learned to read the blockchain faster than criminals learned to hide in it. Then Monero appeared. And for the first time in the history of digital finance, mathematics truly proved stronger than the state. Not trickery, not a workaround, not an exploit. Pure cryptography that made surveillance technically impossible. The ARS offered $625,000 for a hack. Chainalysis deployed decoy nodes. Finnish investigators dug into conversion points. No one broke the math. No one. And then they moved on to Plan B. If you can't track it, ban it. If you can't ban it, replace it. Squeeze private money out of legal circulation and offer your own in return. Completely transparent, completely controllable, completely subordinate. The digital yuan is already in operation. The digital euro is on its way. More than 130 countries are developing their own versions. The world is moving towards a system where every penny, every transfer, every purchase will be recorded, analyzed, and stored forever. Not in dozens of separate databases, as is currently the case, in a single registry, under a single control. And on the other side is the formula. Ring signatures, stealth addresses, Pedersen commitments. Mathematics that does not depend on politics, is not subject to decrees, and does not change when the government changes. It either works or it doesn't. And so far, it works. But the window is not infinite. Every delisting, every new law, every restriction narrows the space in which this mathematics can exist. Technology is powerful, but technology is useless if there is no one to use it. CryptoPunks believe that code was stronger than law. For 30 years, that was true. The question is whether it will remain true tomorrow, because in a world where money is becoming transparent, privacy is not a luxury, it is not a whim, and it is certainly not a crime. It is a right. The right to decide for yourself who you tell what about yourself. The very right that Eric Hughes wrote about in his manifesto 30 years ago. And if you think that this does not concern you, that you have nothing to hide and no reason to hide, remember one thing. The right to privacy does not exist to protect those who have something to hide. It exists to protect everyone. Because a world where you don't have that right is a world where someone else decides for you what you can and cannot do. And this world is closer than you think. My name is Mr. Darkweb. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Think, decide for yourselves, and remember, mathematics is still on your side.
$73 billion in Satoshi Nakamoto's dormant wallets. On April 8, 2026, the New York Times revealed his name, 2 spaces after the full stop. That is exactly how, according to the New York Times, they managed to identify the man around whose identity the wildest theories have been spun for 17 years. No hacking, no surveillance, no spy network. Punctuation. My name is Mr. Darkweb, and I don't believe the New York Times. 6 months ago, I closed my investigation into Satoshi Nakamoto, or so I thought at the time. I spent months trawling through forum archives, digging up old correspondence, and piecing together a timeline of events from the white paper to his disappearance. I thought I'd said everything there was to say without knowing his name, and that we might never find out his name. On April 8th, 2026, someone sent me a link, 10,000 words in the New York Times. The author was John Carreyrou, the very same Carreyrou who brought down Theranos and sent Elizabeth Holmes to prison, a man whose name in journalism means one thing. If he sets his sights on something, someone is going to lose everything. Carrera spent a year on it. He spent a whole year of his life poring over archives of cryptographic mailing lists from the 1990s and 2000s. He brought in an artificial intelligence specialist. He hired a computational linguist. He ran 30 years worth of correspondence through algorithms. And he arrived at a name that the crypto community feared to hear: Adam Beck. I read the article 3 times, then once more. Then I started checking the facts, fact by fact, argument by argument. And the deeper I dug, the more questions I had. Not for Adam Beck, for John Carrier. This is the story of how America's finest investigator hunted a ghost that no one had been able to catch for 17 years, and why I think he missed the mark. To grasp the scale of what happened on April 8th, you need to understand who John Carriero is, because he is not a blogger, a crypto enthusiast, or a conspiracy theorist from YouTube. He's a man who brings down empires. Carriero is Franco-American. He was born into the family of the renowned French journalist Gérard Carriero. He grew up in Paris. He graduated from Duke University in 1994, and he spent 20 years working for the Wall Street Journal, first in Brussels, then in Paris, and then in New York. During that time, he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. 2. This is the highest honor in American journalism, and most journalists never win a single one in their entire career. But it was in 2015 that his name truly became legendary. Carriero began digging into Theranos and its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, a startup that promised a revolution in medicine, blood tests using just a single drop from a finger, valued at $9 billion. Its board of directors included former secretaries of state, generals, and senators. Rupert Murdoch personally invested $125 million. Holmes found out about Carriero's investigation and went on the offensive. She hired David Boies, one of the most expensive lawyers in America. She had Carriero's sources put under surveillance. She approached Murdoch, the owner of the Wall Street Journal, with a request to suppress the article. Murdoch refused. The article was published. Theranos collapsed. Holmes went to federal prison. Carriero wrote the book Bad Blood, which became a bestseller. It was adapted into an HBO documentary and a Hulu series. Journalists study his methods at universities. 150 interviews. 60 former employees. Every fact is cross-checked against multiple sources. In 2023, Carriero moved from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times, and he set his sights on a new goal, the most ambitious of his career. It all began with a documentary. In 2024, HBO released the film Money Electric, The Bitcoin Mystery. Director Colin Hoback attempted to uncover the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto and ultimately pointed the finger at Canadian developer Peter Todd. Todd denied everything, and the theory fell apart almost immediately. But Carriero wasn't watching the film for Todd's sake. Something else had caught his attention. The scene on the bench in Riga, Latvia, the interview with Adam Beck, when the presenter asked the direct question, "Are you Satoshi?" Beck changed. Carriero would later write that his eyes darted about, a nervous chuckle escaped him, and his left hand twitched. Carriero rewatched that clip several times. He'd seen this before. He'd spent years observing Elizabeth Holmes, and had learned to spot lies through micro-expressions. That evening, Carriero decided he'd found a new patient. He started digging, and the following 12 months became an obsession. Carriero brought in Dylan Friedman, an artificial intelligence specialist. Together, they compiled the archives of 3 cryptography mailing lists: cypherpunks, cryptography, and hashcash. The period covered 1992 to October 30th, 2008, that is, up to the day the white paper was published. 30 years of correspondence, thousands upon thousands of messages. They uploaded all of this into a database and began comparing it with Satoshi's known writings, forum posts, code comments, and letters that came to light during the trial thanks to Finnish programmer Martti Malmi, who revealed hundreds of letters from Satoshi. At the same time, Carriero came across Florian Caffiero, a French computational linguist. the very same man who had previously helped the New York Times identify the people behind the QAnon movement. Cafiero specializes in stylometry, the science of determining the author of a text based on writing style. This is not graphology, nor is it intuition. It is mathematics. Word frequency, sentence length, punctuation, grammatical errors. Every person has their own unique linguistic fingerprint, just like a fingerprint. 34,000 potential suspects, 3 decades worth of archives, 2 analytical algorithms, and a single result to which both methods arrived independently of one another. Adam Beck. Carrera checked the results 3 times. Each time, Beck came out on top, across all 3 text corpora. A coincidence? Statistically, it's almost impossible, but almost isn't definitely. And it is in that almost that the whole problem with the New York Times investigation lies. Adam Beck was born in London in July 1970. His first computer was a Sinclair ZX81, the iconic British machine with just 1 kilobyte of memory. He was around 11 years old when he learned to program in BASIC. Not at school, on his own. In his spare time, he reverse engineered video games and searched for decryption keys in software packages. He was 12. He left school with top marks in mathematics, physics, and economics. He went on to study at the University of Exeter, where he obtained a PhD in computer science, specializing in distributed systems. During his studies, he became fascinated by what seemed at the time to be a fringe area: PGP encryption, electronic cache, and anonymous relay servers. He spent 2/3 of his time as a postgraduate on cryptography rather than on his thesis. After graduating, Beck became a consultant in applied cryptography. He wrote cryptographic libraries, designed security protocols, and cracked other people's. He worked with Nokia, with Zero Knowledge Systems, the company that built the precursor to the Tor network, and later with Microsoft and EMC. But alongside his commercial work, he led a double life. Beck was a cypherpunk, a genuine one, not the sort who reads manifestos online, but the sort who writes them. In the 90s, he became one of the most active contributors to the cypherpunks mailing list, a closed community of cryptographers, hackers, and privacy activists who believed that encryption would change the world. This mailing list included people whose names are now known to anyone who knows anything about cryptocurrencies: Hal Finney, Nick Szabo, Wei Dai, David Chaum, and Adam Beck. In 1997, Beck created Hashcash, a system that required a computer to solve a mathematical puzzle before sending an email. The idea was simple. If sending a single email takes a few seconds of computation, this is imperceptible to the average user, but devastating for a spammer sending out millions of emails. The principle was called proof of work. Beck released Hashcash as open source code. He wrote a research paper. He discussed the idea on the cypherpunks mailing list. His work was noticed. Wei Dai used the proof of work concept in his B-Money project. Nick Szabo used it in BitGold. Hal Finney used it in RPOW. All 3 projects were attempts to create a digital currency. All 3 failed, but Beck's mechanism, proof of work, survived. On October 31st, 2008, a 9-page document appeared on the Met's Dow cryptography mailing list. The white paper was entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The author was Satoshi Nakamoto. The references section contained 6 citations. One of these was to Adam Beck's Hashcash. But here's the strange thing. Just over 2 months before the white paper was published, on August 20th, 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a letter, the first known letter in the history of Bitcoin, and he didn't send it to just anyone. He sent it to Adam Beck. In the letter, Satoshi asked whether he had formatted the link to Hashcash correctly and provided a link to a draft of his work. Beck replied the following day. He advised Satoshi to read Wei Dai's article on B-Money. Satoshi replied that he hadn't known about B-Money, but that the ideas were similar. 5 letters, August 2008 to January 2009. They were only made public in February 2024, when they were submitted as evidence in the London court case COPA versus Craig Wright. Most people who read these letters saw them as proof that Beck and Satoshi were two different people. Carrera saw something else. He suggested that Beck might have sent these letters to himself, as part of a cover story. Carriero has no evidence to support this, not a shred. Yet it was precisely this theory that formed the basis of the entire New York Times investigation. There's another fact that continues to trouble me. In July 2025, Adam Back announced the creation of the Bitcoin Standard Treasury Company, BSTR for short. The company holds 30,000 Bitcoins on its balance sheet, over $3.5 billion. BSTR is going public via a reverse merger with Cantor Equity Partners, an entity controlled by Cantor Fitzgerald, one of Wall Street's largest investment banks. The SPAC's chairman is Brandon Laddick, son of the Secretary of Commerce in the Trump administration. A shareholder vote has been scheduled for April 2026, and right at that moment, on April 8th, an article appeared in the New York Times. A coincidence? Perhaps. But if you're planning to float a company with 30,000 Bitcoins on the stock exchange, and at that very moment you're being called Satoshi Nakamoto, the man who still holds another 1,100,000 Bitcoins, this isn't just an article. It's a bomb under your business. Beck responded on the very same day. He wrote a post explaining his position. According to him, he had been one of the most active contributors to the cypherpunks mailing list since 1992. For decades, he had written about electronic cash, privacy, and cryptography. That's precisely why his texts are so similar to Satoshi's. They both wrote about the same things, using the same terms, in the same mailing lists. Correlation does not imply causation. Similarity is not identity. And the fact that Carrero found similarities is not because Beck is Satoshi, but because Beck wrote in the mailing lists more often than anyone else. The more texts there are, the more statistical overlaps there are. Simple maths. Blockstream has issued an official statement. The investigation is based on circumstantial interpretations and speculation rather than cryptographic evidence. Adam Back has repeatedly stated that he is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and that's where my first question arose. Would a man who had been hiding from the world for 17 years really have sent letters to himself, knowing that sooner or later they might come to light? Would he become the CEO of a public company with 30,000 Bitcoins on the balance sheet, knowing that every journalist in the world dreams of exposing him? Or is this the logic of a journalist who has already decided who is to blame and is now bending the facts to fit the answer? But the letters were only the beginning, because Carrero's main weapon wasn't to be found in the postal archives. It lay in the gaps, literally. 600 subscribers to 3 cryptographic mailing lists, 30 years of correspondence, and one question: which of them writes in the same way as Satoshi Nakamoto? Carrera and Friedman started with the simplest clue: 2 spaces after the full stop. It sounds like a minor detail, but in linguistics, there are no minor details. Putting 2 spaces after a full stop is a habit of people who learned to type on typewriters or early computers. In the 70s and 80s, it was the norm. By the 2000s, it had become an anachronism. Most people under 40 use a single space. Satoshi used 2. Not always, in about 70% of cases. This meant that he had either learned to type before the 90s or was deliberately alternating his style to cover his tracks. Carrera was the first to apply this filter. Out of 600 active newsletter subscribers, those who had never used 2 spaces were weeded out. Around 200 remained. Then came the next filters: British spelling. Satoshi wrote words such as color and optimize in the British style. He also used check instead of check, but not always. Occasionally, Americanism slipped in. This narrowed the field down to people who also alternated between British and American spellings. Beck is a Brit who has lived in various countries. He alternated between the 2. Next up, hyphens. This is where Carrero found something he considers key evidence. Satoshi used hyphens inconsistently. He wrote compound nouns like double spending with a hyphen even though he shouldn't have, and compound adjectives such as file sharing and hand-tuned were written without a hyphen even though they should have been. This is a specific mistake, not a random one, a systematic one. A person who makes such mistakes does so because they have a rule in their head that is the other way around. They put a hyphen where it isn't needed and leave it out where it is. Carrera and Friedman uploaded the New York Times hyphenation rules to their database and ran all the text through it. They found 67 matching hyphenation errors between Satoshi and Beck. The next closest candidate had half as many, but hyphens are only part of the picture. Carrero claims to have found over 100 words and phrases that Satoshi and Beck use in exactly the same way. Not just the same terms, that would be normal for people in the same field, but identical phrasing in identical contexts. The phrase proof of work, both wrote it with hyphens, although the standard spelling is without them. Partial pre-image, a technical term from cryptography that almost no one outside a narrow circle of specialists uses. Both use it with the same meaning in similar syntactic constructions. The expression burning the money is a metaphor used to describe the destruction of digital tokens. Carrero found it both in Satoshi's writings and in Beck's posts from the 1990s, a decade before Bitcoin came into existence. It goes even deeper. Satoshi mentioned in his post that he is better at programming than writing. Beck said the same thing about himself at conferences. Satoshi used C++ to write the first Bitcoin client. Beck is a C++ specialist. It is his primary language. Satoshi holds a PhD. His academic background is evident in the white paper. Beck has a PhD in distributed systems. Bitcoin is a distributed system. Then there was the confusion over the use of its. Satoshi would occasionally add an apostrophe where it wasn't needed and omit it where it was. The same twisted logic. Beck did the same. Then there's the word also at the end of sentences. That's an unusual construction in English. Satoshi used to do that. Beck used to do that. Then there was the alternating use of email, with and without, a hyphen, eCash, and electronic cash. Satoshi switched back and forth between these forms inconsistently. Carrero ran a query through the database. How many of the remaining suspects also used all these forms interchangeably? The answer, 1. Add them back. When Carrero showed the results to Floriano Cafiero, the linguist noted that his own stylometric analysis had previously failed to produce a clear result. Classical stylometry was unable to distinguish Satoshi from the group of candidates. But hyphenation errors and grammatical quirks are a different matter altogether. That isn't style. Those are habits, and habits are harder to fake than style. Robert Leonard, a forensic linguist at Hofstra University, confirmed to the New York Times that such features are markers of sociolinguistic variation, a kind of linguistic fingerprint that helps to identify the author. That sounds convincing, almost flawless, but I'm going to ask a question that Carrera didn't ask. Adam Back was one of the most active participants in the cypherpunks mailing list. By his own account, he had been involved since 1992. This means that the Carrero database contains significantly more of Back's texts than those of any other participant. When you compare someone who has written thousands of messages with someone who has written dozens, the statistics will favor the former, not because he is the author, but because he is more likely to match by chance. This is called selection bias, and this is the first crack in the foundation of the New York Times investigation. The second flaw lies in the logic itself. People who have been communicating in the same mailing list for decades, discussing the same topics, begin to write in a similar style. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's linguistics. Professional communities develop a shared jargon, shared structures, and shared errors. The CryptoPunks of the 90s were a few dozen people who spent years discussing digital cash, privacy, and cryptography. Their texts are bound to be similar. The question is, how much similarity is enough to identify someone. Carrera thinks that's enough. I don't. But he has another argument, and this argument is stronger than hyphens. Much stronger. There's a fact that cannot be explained away as a coincidence. And this fact is not linguistic. It is chronological. Adam Back has been one of the most active voices in cryptography mailing lists since the early 1990s. He wrote about electronic cash, proof of work, and systems that do not require a trusted intermediary. He was passionate about the subject. Every month brought new posts, replies, and discussions without a break for 15 years running. And then he fell silent. In 2008, when Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper appeared on the cryptography mailing list, Metz Dowd, a document that described precisely what Beck had been dreaming of and writing about since 1997, Beck did not say a word. Not a single comment, not a single question, not a single exclamation mark. The man who, for a decade and a half, had been one of the most vocal advocates of electronic cash, completely ignored the emergence of the first working electronic cash system in history. It's as if a scientist who had spent his whole life searching for a cure for cancer failed to notice that his colleague had found one. In the very same laboratory, in the very same newsletter he read every day. Back remained silent throughout 2008. He remained silent throughout 2009. He remained silent in 2010. He remained silent until April in 2011, until the very moment when Satoshi Nakamoto wrote his final letter and vanished. On April the 23rd, 2011, Satoshi sent his last known message to developer Mike Hearn. He wrote that he had moved on to other things and that Bitcoin was in safe hands, and then he fell silent forever. 6 weeks later, Adam Back reappeared in those very same cryptography mailing lists. It was as if he'd just returned from holiday. He began actively discussing Bitcoin, commenting on it, and suggesting improvements. He quickly became one of the community's leaders. In 2014, he founded Blockstream, a company that builds infrastructure for Bitcoin. He became its CEO. He turned his passion for digital cash into a business valued at billions. Carrera describes this as the key piece of evidence, and I can see his point. The timing does indeed seem suspicious. One person leaves, another arrives, in exactly the same place, with the same interests, with the same knowledge, speaking the same language. But suspicious does not mean proven, and here's why. During those same years, from 2008 to 2011, Beck worked on commercial projects. He advised major technology companies. He had a family. He had a career outside the world of cryptography mailing lists. People leave discussions and come back to them. That's normal. It's not incriminating. That's life. But Carrero did not stop at the timing. He found something else in the archives of the correspondence. Between August 2008 and January 2009, precisely when Satoshi was writing those 5 emails to Beck, Beck stopped posting on the cryptography mailing list, the very same one where Satoshi published the white paper, and before that, he had been posting there regularly. Carrero interprets this unequivocally. Beck could not have been on the mailing list under 2 names at the same time, so he left under one and reappeared under the other. I see it differently. The person who received a letter from Satoshi on August 20th might simply have got on with their work. They were invited to take a look at a revolutionary project. They might have quietly studied the white paper, tested the code, and thought things through. Not everyone who is silent is lying. Sometimes silence is just silence. But there's one detail that keeps nagging at me. In his final email to Satoshi, dated January 2009, Satoshi announced that Bitcoin had been launched. Back did not reply. At all. The creator of Hashcash, the system upon which Bitcoin is literally built, received a personal invitation from Satoshi to join the launch, and he didn't reply. He didn't download the client. He didn't run a node. He didn't ask a single question. Hal Finney replied. He was the first to launch a node after Satoshi. He received the first transaction, 10 Bitcoins. Wei Dai, Reddit, asked questions. Beck, Silence. 3 years of silence. Either Beck had genuinely lost interest in the subject to which he had devoted 15 years, or he already knew everything there was to know, because he had written it himself. Both possibilities are on the table. Neither has been proven, and that is the problem. Carrera bases his investigation on circumstantial evidence, each piece of which has an alternative explanation. 2 spaces, a generational habit, hyphens, standard mailing list jargon, silence, being busy, timing, a coincidence. But when you put all these coincidences together, the picture starts to look different. 1 coincidence is a fluke, 2 is a trend, 10 is a pattern. Carrero found over 100 matching words and phrases between Satoshi and Beck, 67 shared hyphenation errors, perfectly matching timing of appearance and disappearance, and 5 emails that either prove innocence or prove the genius of the disguise. Carrera didn't hide behind the article. He flew to El Salvador, where Beck was due to speak at a crypto conference. He found him, sat down opposite him, and spent 2 hours asking questions. Face to face, Beck denied it. 6 times in 2 hours, he repeated variations of the same phrase. It wasn't me. At one point, he told Carrero straight out, "This proves nothing, and I assure you, it wasn't me." Carrero listened. He observed. He knows how to observe. Years of working on the Holmes case had taught him to read people like open books. But Beck is not Elizabeth Holmes. Holmes was a fraud who hid emptiness behind a facade. Beck, if he really is Satoshi, is a genius who has successfully concealed the greatest secret of the digital age for 17 years. That's a whole different level. After the meeting, Carrero wrote that Beck's behavior had struck him as suspicious. But this is a journalist's subjective assessment, not cryptographic proof. And here's the interesting part. Beck himself later said in an interview that he was used to such encounters. Journalists have been coming to him with the same question for years, and every time, he observed the same thing. When a person is convinced that they are facing Satoshi, they start interpreting every gesture as confirmation. A nervous laugh, evidence. A pause before answering, evidence. A direct gaze, audacity. A averted gaze, fear. Whatever you do, it's all proof. Who is right, me or Carrero? The answer to this question depends on what you believe in. Coincidences or patterns. Mathematics or the intuition of a journalist who was once proven right when the whole world thought he was mad. But before jumping to conclusions, there is one thing to bear in mind. Carrera is not the first person to have tried to find Satoshi. Others came before him, and each of them was convinced they had found the truth. Each of them was wrong. In March 2014, 64-year-old Japanese-American engineer Dorian Prentice Satoshi Nakamoto stepped out of his home in a suburb of Los Angeles to find a crowd of journalists waiting for him. Newsweek magazine had just published a cover featuring his photograph and a headline claiming that he was the creator of Bitcoin. His real name is Satoshi Nakamoto, a coincidence that ruined his life. Dorian had nothing to do with Bitcoin. He was a pensioner, a former defense engineer who lived a quiet life with his mother. But for journalist Leah Goodman, a coincidence of names and a single phrase taken out of context were enough to put the man in the global spotlight. Dorian was hounded for weeks. Cameras, microphones, cars parked outside his house round the clock. 6 months later, the real Satoshi Nakamoto, who had remained silent for years, stepped out of the shadows for exactly 1 second, sending a message from his old account. 4 words that translate as, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto," and then he fell silent again. Newsweek got it wrong, but the most interesting thing about this story isn't the mistake. It's the fact that Hal Finney, one of the leading candidates for the role of Satoshi, lived just a few blocks away from Dorian. A coincidence? Perhaps. But such coincidences crop up with suspicious frequency in this investigation. A year after Dorian, it was Craig Wright's turn, an Australian scientist, businessman, and holder of numerous degrees. In December 2015, Wired and Gizmodo simultaneously published investigations pointing the finger at Wright, leaked documents, emails, and blog posts. A few hours after publication, the Australian Tax Office raided his home. Wright went further than anyone else. He didn't just refuse to deny it, he claimed that he was Satoshi. In May 2016, he organized a private demonstration for a few journalists and Gavin Andresen, Bitcoin's lead developer following Satoshi's departure. He signed the message with a key from an early block. Gavin believed him, but when the global community demanded public proof, Wright refused. He cited emotional pressure. Next came the court case. The family of Wright's late partner, Dave Kleiman, filed a lawsuit accusing Wright of stealing Bitcoins. Wright claimed he could not access the coins due to a cryptographic time lock set to expire in 2020. When the deadline arrived, nothing happened. The coins didn't budge. In March 2024, a British court handed down its final ruling. Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and his documents are forgeries. Cryptographers discovered that the PGP keys he had provided as evidence had been created retrospectively in 2014, not 2008. Wright was given the nickname Factoshi, but he let slip one thing during the trial. He said that the real Satoshi would never reveal himself, because that would mean his death. When the judge asked him to explain, Wright fell silent. Then there was Peter Todd, a Canadian developer. HBO devoted an entire documentary to pointing the finger at him. The main piece of evidence was that in 2010, Todd allegedly accidentally continued Satoshi's post from a personal account on the Bitcoin Talk forum. Plus, there was the British-Canadian writing style. Todd denied everything and provided photographic alibis for key dates. He was 23 when the white paper was published. The theory fell apart. There was Nick Szabo, the creator of the BitGold concept, a precursor to Bitcoin. A linguistic analysis from 2014 revealed a striking similarity in writing styles. Double spaces, rare terminology, similar turns of phrase, but Szabo is a public figure, an active user of social media, the complete opposite of the paranoid Satoshi. And more importantly, Satoshi claimed he knew nothing about BitGold until he was told about it after the white paper was published. It's strange not to know about the work of the man you supposedly are. Fortune published an article this week reminding readers of Szabo and stating outright that Carrera was quick to dismiss this candidate. There was Hal Finney, a legend of the cypherpunk movement, the first person to receive Bitcoin from Satoshi. He died in 2014 from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Before his death, he had his body cryogenized. Along with him, perhaps, the answers to the questions we have been asking for the past 17 years have also been frozen. There was Len Sassaman, a cryptographer and privacy activist. He took his own life in July 2011, 2 months after Satoshi's disappearance. He had been working on anonymous payment systems. His period of activity coincided with Satoshi's patterns. 6 candidates, 6 failures. Newsweek, Wired, Gizmodo, HBO. The world's biggest media outlets have tried and failed. And now, the New York Times. The world's most authoritative newspaper, the world's most dangerous journalist, the most advanced analytical method in the history of the search. But there's one thing that none of them, including Carrera, has provided: a signature using a private key. The only cryptographic proof that cannot be forged and cannot be refuted. If you are Satoshi, sign the message using the key from the Genesis block. Full stop. Everything else is mere speculation. Carrera spent a year on it. He wrote 10,000 words. He enlisted the help of the best linguists. He used artificial intelligence. He sifted through 30 years worth of archives. And what was the result? Not a single signature with a private key, not a single eyewitness, not a single confession, not a single document bearing the name Satoshi Nakamoto, and a photograph of Adam Back. The entire investigation rests on 3 pillars: linguistics, timing, and the journalist's intuition. Each of these pillars is shaky. We've covered the linguistics, sampling bias, the community's general jargon. Cafiero himself admitted that his classic stylometric analysis did not yield a clear-cut result. Only hyphenation errors and grammatical quirks set Beck apart. But a hyphenation error is not DNA. It is a habit that could have developed in anyone from the same background. We've worked out the timing as well. When Beck fell silent, Satoshi spoke up. When Satoshi fell silent, Beck spoke again. It looks suspicious, but there are dozens of reasons for silence, apart from a secret double life. Carrero's intuition is the most controversial aspect. Yes, he exposed Theranos. Yes, he has a knack for spotting lies. But Theranos was a fraud. There was nothing behind the facade. The technology didn't work, and that could be proven. Here, if Beck really is Satoshi, there is no fraud. There's a man who created a working technology, stole nothing, deceived no one, and wishes to remain anonymous. This is a completely different situation, and the skills that help Carrero expose Holmes may work against him here, because he is looking for lies where there may simply be silence. But there is something that Carrero failed to mention in his investigation, and that, in my view, is the most interesting part of the whole story. In July 2025, Adam Back became CEO of BSTR, the Bitcoin Standard Treasury Company. 30,000 Bitcoins on the balance sheet, $1.5 billion in raised capital. Going public via a SPAC with Cantor Fitzgerald, a bank linked to the family of the US Secretary of Commerce. If you are Satoshi Nakamoto, if you have 1,100,000 Bitcoins worth $73 billion stashed away somewhere, why would you need a public company with 30,000? Why go public? Why put your name on SEC filings knowing that every regulator, every tax official, every journalist in the world will be watching your every move? Either Beck isn't Satoshi, in which case BSTR is simply a shrewd business venture by a cryptographer who recognized Bitcoin's value before anyone else, or Beck is Satoshi, in which case he's playing the most dangerous game in history. He runs a public company with 30,000 Bitcoins, whilst another 1,100,000 lie in his anonymous wallets, and he is waiting for someone to connect the dots. Carrera has connected them, or at least he thinks he has. Nicholas Gregory, one of the early members of the Bitcoin community in the UK, said after the article was published that he did not believe the New York Times account, but he added something important. If Beck is indeed Satoshi, then we must respect the incredible efforts he has made to ensure that no one finds out. And in that case, we must respect his obvious desire to remain anonymous. Gregory also warned, publicly identifying Satoshi, whoever he may be, puts that person and their family in mortal danger. $73 billion in wallets, to which there may be a key. This isn't just money, it's a target. Jameson Lopp, a well-known Bitcoin developer, reacted more strongly. He wrote that Satoshi Nakamoto cannot be caught using stylometry, and called the article irresponsible. The New York Times has painted a huge target on Adam Back's back, armed with nothing but weak circumstantial evidence. Alex Thorne of Galaxy Digital called the article rubbish. The crypto community largely sided with Beck, not because they are convinced of his innocence, but because there is one rule. Until there's a signature from the private key, there's no proof. Everything else is just noise. I began this story with a simple statement: I don't trust the New York Times. Now, after weeks of scrutinizing every argument, I'll be honest, it's all turned out to be more complicated than I thought. Carrera isn't a fool. He isn't Newsweek, which pointed the finger at a random Japanese man. He isn't HBO, which chose a 23-year-old Canadian. He isn't Wired, which fell for Craig Wright's fake keys. Carrera did what no one had done before him. He carried out a systematic analysis of 30 years of correspondence and obtained a statistically significant result. This isn't rubbish. It's serious work, but hard work is no guarantee. Here's what I think, and I must stress, this is my theory, not a fact. Adam Back knows who Satoshi is. Perhaps he was part of the group. Perhaps he was the one who wrote key parts of the code. Perhaps he was the one to whom Satoshi entrusted his ideas. Even before the white paper, there's a reason why Satoshi wrote his first letter to him specifically. There's a reason why their texts are so similar. There's a reason why he remained silent for 3 years and returned exactly when Satoshi left. But part of the story and the author of the story are two different things. Carrero wanted to find one person, one name, one face on the front page of the New York Times. Reality may be different. Satoshi could have been a group, could have been an idea realized by several people, could have been a project that grew out of the cypherpunks mailing list as a collective effort, signed by a single pseudonym. If that is the case, then Carrero has found one thread, perhaps the most important one, but not the whole carpet. There's another question that keeps nagging at me. Why did the New York Times publish this investigation at this particular moment, on April 8th, 2026, just as Adam Beck's BSTR is going through the shareholder approval process to go public? A coincidence? Carrero had been working on it for a year. He could have published the article in any month. Why April specifically? I am not claiming it was planned, but I am asking the question. Meanwhile, $73 billion lie in dormant wallets, untouched for 17 years. Not a single coin has been moved. Not a single key has been used. Not a single signature has appeared. And until that happens, all the investigations in the world, from Newsweek to the New York Times, remain what they are, attempts to catch a ghost. I don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. After Carrero's investigation, I know one thing. Adam Back is closer to the answer than any of us, but being the closest to the answer doesn't mean he is the answer. Some secrets aren't meant to be revealed. They exist to remind us that in a world where everything can be tracked, recorded, and analyzed, one person or a group of people managed to remain invisible. They created a system worth trillions, and then they walked away without taking a single penny. Perhaps this is the true measure of genius. Not the code, not the white paper, not the proof of work, but the ability to vanish, leaving behind nothing but questions. As always, your Mr. Dark Web. On the 8th of June 2021, 800 people across 16 countries were woken by a knock at the door. At the same time, at the very same hour, they had all been using a messaging app they believed to be the most secure on the planet. What they didn't know was that this app had been created by the FBI 3 years earlier. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to tell you why every app you trust with your messages could turn out to be a trap, and why the word secure means nothing anymore in the world of messaging apps. This story began quite by chance for me. I was browsing through one of those leak aggregators, not the dark web, just a regular public site where leaked documents and databases are posted. There, amongst hundreds of archives, I came across a file that at first glance didn't seem particularly remarkable. Server log files. Tables with dates, timestamps, and device IDs. No names, no message content, just dry figures. But when I started cross-referencing this data with the timeline of the biggest police operations over the last 5 years, a picture emerged. And to be honest, it scared me. To help you grasp the scale of what happened, we need to go back to where it all began. Until 2013, the world communicated openly. Literally, your text messages traveled over the network as plain text. Anyone with access to the infrastructure could read them with ease. Email worked on the same principle. Messaging apps from the early 2000s, ICQ, AIM, early Skype, encrypted data at the connection level with the server. but the server itself could see everything. It's like sending a letter in a transparent envelope. The postman politely pretends not to read it, but nothing stops him from doing so. There were, of course, tools for the paranoid. PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, first appeared back in 1991. Public key encryption, a powerful tool, but using it was about as convenient as assembling IKEA furniture without instructions, written in Swedish. You had to generate keys, exchange them, store them, and make sure you didn't lose them. Only a handful of people bothered with this. Hackers, cryptographers, paranoid journalists. The average person had never even heard of PGP. And then came June 5th, 2013. Edward Snowden, a 29-year-old contractor for the US National Security Agency working for Booz Allen Hamilton, handed over thousands of classified documents to journalists Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, and the world saw what it had previously only suspected. The PRISM program gave the NSA direct access to the servers of 9 major tech companies: Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Apple, and others. Emails, chats, files, video calls, all of this was at the fingertips of the intelligence services. Xkeyscore functioned as a search engine for global internet traffic. Simply entering an email address was enough to obtain a complete picture of someone's online life. The upstream program intercepted data directly from the fiber optic cables carrying the planet's main traffic. In Spain, the NSA collected metadata from 60 million telephone calls in a single month. 60 million. In 1 month. In a single country. Before Snowden, if you told anyone that the government was monitoring the communications of all its citizens, you were dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Since June 2013, this has become a proven fact. Not a supposition. Not a theory. A fact acknowledged by the government itself. The world reacted exactly as it should have, with panic. But the panic proved productive. The tech companies whose names appeared in Snowden's documents found themselves trapped by their own reputations. Apple announced that it would no longer comply with the NSA request for access to user data. Google began encrypting traffic between its data centers. Congress passed the USA Freedom Act of 2015, restricting the mass collection of metadata. And among developers, a real race began to see who would be the first to create a tool that would make mass surveillance technically impossible. In 2013, Open Whisper Systems developed the Signal protocol. Put simply, it's a way of encrypting messages so that not even the server through which they pass can read them. Only the sender and the recipient can. Imagine this: you put a letter in a safe, lock it with a key that only you and the person you're writing to have, and then send the safe through the post. The postman carries the safe, but cannot open it. No one can, not even the person who built the safe. On April 5th, 2016, WhatsApp announced that it had integrated the Signal protocol into all forms of communication: chats, group chats, calls, and file sharing. 1 billion users were instantly granted end-to-end encryption by default. The Electronic Frontier Foundation called this one of the most significant events in the history of digital privacy. It seemed that the battle had been won. People could message each other freely. No one was reading. No one was watching. But here's the problem. Imagine that same envelope again. Let's say the letter inside is encrypted. The postman can't read it, but he can see who sent the envelope, to whom, at what time, from which town, how often that person writes to that particular recipient. He sees that at 3 o'clock in the morning, you sent something to an address you've never written to before. That is metadata. And sometimes it reveals more about you than the contents of the letter itself. Since Snowden, I've seen dozens of discussions on Darknet forums. People wrote, "Encryption is a smokescreen, a beautiful, convincing smokescreen. Behind it, you feel safe, but those who need to find you have long since learned to read not the letters, but the envelopes." And whilst ordinary people were celebrating the dawn of the privacy era, a parallel market was already operating in the shadows. Messaging apps you'd never heard of. They weren't sold on the App Store. They had no adverts or logos. They cost €1,500 each. And their customers were people for whom privacy isn't a matter of comfort. It's a question of freedom or imprisonment, life or death. 1,500 euros for a phone, 1,500 for a 6-month subscription. That's a total of 3,000 euros to get a device that can't make calls, can't access the internet, and can't take photos. A phone with no camera, no microphone, no GPS, just one function, sending encrypted messages to other phones like it, and a button that deletes everything in 3 seconds. It was Phantom Secure, and it was perhaps the most audacious business model in the history of the criminal underworld. The company was founded in Canada. Its founder, Vincent Ramos, started out as a standard IT specialist. The idea was simple. Take a BlackBerry smartphone, which was considered the gold standard for corporate security at the time, strip away all the unnecessary features, and install custom PGP-based encryption. Messages are routed via servers in Panama and Hong Kong. Remote device wipe in the event of the owner's arrest. Round-the-clock technical support, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Just like any premium mobile operator. But Phantom wasn't alone. He was part of an entire industry that had grown up in the shadows. Crypto phones, that's what they were called. Dozens of small companies around the world modified devices and sold them to those willing to pay for invisibility. The difference between them and ordinary messaging apps was fundamental. Not only was the content encrypted, but the device itself became a closed system. No browsers, no apps, no access to the open internet. Just an encrypted channel to other devices of the same kind. Sounds like a niche product for corporate paranoids? Perhaps. But Ramos's clientele turned out to be a rather specific lot. I've come across articles mentioning the nicknames of Phantom Secure users. Some of them left little to the imagination. People made no secret of why they needed these phones. By 2017, the FBI estimated that there were over 20,000 Phantom Secure devices in operation worldwide. Its clients included the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, the Australian chapter of the Hells Angels, and international drug networks. The company was generating tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and all of this was happening in the open. Phantom Secure had a website, distributors, and, as I mentioned, a support service. It was business as usual, except that the product was invisibility to the law. The FBI began investigating Phantom back in 2017. Working alongside the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Australian Federal Police, agents began gathering evidence. Undercover agents made contact with the distributors posing as buyers. In one such encounter, when an undercover Canadian police officer asked whether the phone would be suitable for shipping drugs to Montreal, a Phantom employee replied that it was absolutely fine. They did not even try to hide what their product was intended for, and at some point, the FBI offered Ramos a deal. According to evidence that later came to light in court, the Bureau asked him to build a backdoor into the Phantom Secure system, a secret loophole through which agents could read users' correspondence. It was a moment of choice. Ramos refused, a decision that cost him his freedom. But, as it would later transpire, it was precisely this refusal that set in motion a chain of events leading to the creation of ANOM. On March 7th, 2018, Vincent Ramos was sitting in the Over Easy restaurant in Bellingham, Washington. He lived just across the border in Richmond, Canada, and apparently thought that a quick trip for breakfast posed no risk to him. He was wrong. FBI agents arrested him right at his table. The charges were racketeering and aiding and abetting drug trafficking under the RICO Act. Ramos pleaded guilty, confiscation, $80 million in cash and assets, 150 domain names, and server licenses. Sentence: 9 years in a federal prison. He was only released in November of 2024 and deported back to Canada. But the downfall of Phantom Secure is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning. 20,000 devices suddenly turned into bricks. 20,000 people, dealers, couriers, coordinators, bosses, were left without a signal. Imagine all your logistics, All your contacts, all your arrangements went through a single channel, and that channel vanished in an instant. You urgently need a replacement. You're prepared to pay any price. You're prepared to trust anyone, as long as they look convincing. I saw dozens of discussions on Darknet forums during those weeks. People were asking, where should we move to? Who can we trust? Some suggested EncroChat, a European service that was gaining momentum. Others mentioned SkyECC, a Canadian platform with servers in France. And some recommended a new, little-known messenger. No website, no advertising, just devices passed from hand to hand. Word of mouth in the criminal underworld. The messaging app was called Anom, and as the head of the Dutch police would later say, it had an impeccable reputation among criminals. People trusted it implicitly. They openly discussed deliveries, locations, and sums of money. They sent photos of goods, selfies, and even pictures of their tattoos. They didn't know the most important thing, the thing that was set to change the game forever, the thing that would force everyone, from small-time dealers to cartel bosses, to rethink the very concept of security. Anom was created by the FBI from day one, from the very first line of code. Every message, every photo, every voice recording, everything was copied and sent straight to the Bureau's headquarters. 3 years, 12,000 devices, 100 countries, and not a single person suspected a thing. But how exactly did the FBI manage to pull off the biggest sting operation in the history of law enforcement? How did they get thousands of professional criminals, whose very survival depends on being paranoid, to voluntarily install a bug on their phones? Imagine the task. You need to create a messaging app, not for ordinary people, but for professional criminals. People who have lived in a state of paranoia for years, who change their phones every few months, never use their real names, and know the protocols for destroying evidence by heart. You need these people, thousands of them, to voluntarily download your app and start discussing murders, shipments by the ton, and transfers worth millions. And yet, not a single one of them must suspect a thing over the course of 3 years. That is exactly what the FBI did, and they started with a man who was already in their custody. Following the collapse of Phantom Secure in March 2018, the Bureau acquired more than just servers and domain names. It gained something far more valuable, an informant, a former Phantom Secure employee whose name remains classified, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. This individual possessed unique expertise. He knew how the crypto phone industry worked from the inside. He knew what customers expected. He knew what trust looked like in a world where trust is a luxury. The FBI set him a task to build a new platform from scratch. The devices, based on the Google Pixel, looked like ordinary smartphones but had a hidden side. One password unlocked the standard interface. Calls, camera, browser, everything just like a normal phone. A second password, entered via a hidden app, a clock or calculator, unlocked the encrypted messenger, Anom. But hidden within the code of this messaging app was a feature that none of the users knew about. Before each message was sent, it was copied and forwarded to a third-party server. From there, it went straight to the FBI. The Bureau wasn't reading the correspondence after the fact, nor through hacking, nor via a search warrant. It was reading it in real time. Every word, every photo, every voice file. From the very first day the platform existed, the main problem remained: legitimacy. How could the criminal underworld be persuaded to trust this new product? The market for crypto phones isn't like the App Store. There are no adverts or rating here. Here, reputation is built on one thing alone: a recommendation from someone whose life you would trust. And the FBI understood this. The agency employed a tactic known in intelligence circles as planting through key figures. The first Anom devices were placed in the hands of several prominent figures in the criminal underworld, individuals whose opinions carried weight within criminal networks in Australia and Southeast Asia. The court documents provide only a vague account of exactly how this was organized, but the result is clear. These individuals began using Anom themselves and recommending it to their associates, and in a world without advertising, a personal recommendation from a boss is the best marketing there is. At the same time, the FBI was tackling another challenge, protecting itself from competitors. The crypto phone industry was a cutthroat environment where companies regularly attacked one another, hacking rivals' servers, spreading rumors about backdoors, and poaching customers. Anom had to do more than just look the part. It had to survive this war. The FBI effectively had to run a commercial enterprise, maintaining servers, updating software, and responding to user complaints. The Federal Bureau of Investigation acting as technical support for drug dealers. Now that sounds absurd, but that's exactly how it worked. By mid-2019, the number of active devices had begun to grow exponentially. By October, there were several hundred. By the end of 2020, there were thousands. By May 2021, there were around 9,000 active devices in more than 100 countries. In total, over the course of the operation, more than 12,000 phones were sold to over 300 criminal organizations, the Italian Mafia in Australia, Albanian organized crime, outlaw biker gangs, and Latin American drug cartels. All of them regarded Anom as their primary security tool. The FBI informant was paid $120,000 a year for his work, plus expenses. A small price to pay for 27 million intercepted messages. Were there those who had their doubts? Yes. In March 2021, a post appeared on a blog in which the author explicitly described ANOM as a suspicious project. He pointed out several oddities: overly aggressive promotion, unclear origins, and a lack of transparency regarding its development history. But this post was lost in the noise. The trust built through the authority of the criminal underworld proved stronger than any arguments. People didn't trust the technology, they trusted the people, and that was their downfall. And then the day everyone had been waiting for finally arrived, except for those who were supposed to. On the 8th of June 2021, in coordination with the law enforcement agencies from 16 countries, the FBI launched Operation Trojan Shield. In Australia, the first raids began at dawn. The wave then swept across Europe, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. In a single week, over 800 arrests worldwide, seized 32 tons of drugs, including 8 tons of cocaine and 22 tons of cannabis, 250 firearms, 55 luxury cars, $48 million in cash and cryptocurrency, more than 50 drug laboratories shut down, 17 people arrested for distributing the Anom devices themselves. I remember how the Darknet forums went into meltdown that day. The panic was total. People who thought themselves invisible that very morning realized by evening that every message they'd sent over the past 3 years was sitting in a folder bearing their name somewhere in an office in Washington. One user wrote, "We've given ourselves away." Another put it more succinctly, "It's all over. There's nothing left to trust." But here's the important thing. Anom wasn't the first operation of this scale, nor was it even the second. A year before Trojan Shield, 2 major blows had already been dealt in Europe, which the criminal underworld only discovered about far too late. EncroChat and SkyECC, 2 messaging apps that were considered impenetrable, 2 services through which a significant portion of European drug trafficking passed. Both were hacked, both almost simultaneously, and the scale of what the police found inside left even seasoned investigators speechless. 1 billion messages. That's exactly how many the Belgian police intercepted when they hacked into SkyECC. 1 billion. Not 1,000, not 1,000,000, 1 billion. The content of these messages was so explicit that one of the investigators later remarked, "It was as if we were sitting at the same table with the criminals. Photos of torture, orders to kill, coordinates of stashes containing tons of cocaine, and selfies, lots of selfies. But to understand how we reached that billion, we need to start a little earlier with a messaging app that was the first to fall. EncroChat launched in 2016. It was a European service that emerged from the ashes of earlier encrypted messaging apps. By 2020, it had around 60,000 users worldwide, with 10,000 in the UK alone. The devices cost around €1,000, and a 6-month subscription was €1,500. Round-the-clock support, automatic message deletion, remote wipe function. A familiar set of features, isn't it? By that point, it was already the industry standard. The French National Gendarmerie first uncovered EncroChat back in 2017 during operations targeting organized crime. The company's servers were located in France, and that proved to be its fatal mistake. In early 2019, the investigation received funding from the European Union and gained momentum. In late January 2020, a judge in Lille granted authorization to access EncroChat's server infrastructure. What the French did next was, in its own way, ingenious. They developed specialized malware and implanted it directly onto EncroChat servers. This tool allowed them to read messages before they were encrypted at the device level. It also recorded screen lock passwords. In essence, the gendarmerie was standing over every user's shoulder, watching everything they typed. On March 15th, 2020, France set up a special unit to process intercepted data. On April 10th, an agreement was signed to establish a joint investigation team with the Dutch police through Eurojust, with the support of Europol. From 1st April, the UK's National Crime Agency began receiving decrypted data. And for 2 months, April and May, the police forces of the 3 countries monitored the communications of tens of thousands of people in real time. The scale of what they uncovered was unprecedented. As part of its operation, codenamed Eternal, the London Metropolitan Police gained access to the communications of 1,400 suspects, corrupt police officers in the pay of the mafia, conspiracies to murder, illegal arms trafficking, tons of drugs. For the first time in history, the police saw a complete map of the links between rival criminal gangs, who works with whom, who pays whom, who betrays whom. EncroChat users felt so secure that they didn't even bother with basic precautions. They sent selfies that the police later used to identify them during arrests, photos of tattoos that matched those officers saw during searches, photos of their homes from which their addresses could be identified. One user coordinated deals straight from his hot tub, switching between personal matters and discussions about arms shipments and cash collections. The police knew more about these criminals than their own families did. Then, on June 13th, 2020, the EncroChat administrators discovered that the platform had been compromised. They sent out an urgent message to all users. The platform had been hacked. Destroy your devices immediately. But it was too late. The data had already been collected and distributed among law enforcement agencies across Europe. Europol's assessment of the operation 3 years on: 6,558 arrests worldwide, of which around 200 were high-value targets, that is, leaders of major criminal organizations, 900 million euros in criminal assets seized, 115 million messages intercepted from 60,000 users. In the UK alone, more than 2,600 arrests and 1,384 criminal charges. And this is where something happened that, looking back, seems incredible. The criminals, having learnt of the takedown of EncroChat, did not go underground. They migrated, en masse, hastily, in a panic, and most of them moved to Sky ECC. Sky ECC was founded in 2008 in Vancouver by a Canadian named Jean-Francois Yip. By the end of 2020, the platform had attracted over 70,000 users, 11,000 in the Netherlands and 6,000 in Belgium. The servers were located in OVH Cloud's data centers in Roubaix, in northern France. France again. The same mistake again. Belgian and Dutch intelligence agencies had been monitoring Sky ECC for 2.5 years. On February 15th, 2021, they gained access to the servers. For 3 weeks, the police monitored the communications in real time. During that time, they prevented dozens of planned crimes, kidnappings, shootouts, and murders. People continued to write. They continued to send photographs. They continued to coordinate shipments via the port of Antwerp, which by that point had become the main gateway for cocaine into Europe. 110 tons seized in a single year alone. On March 9th, 2021, at 4 a.m., 1,500 Belgian police officers simultaneously launched 200 raids, mainly in the Antwerp area. 48 arrests were made in a single day. 17 tons of cocaine. 1,200,000 euros in cash. Among those detained were lawyers, serving police officers, a member of the public prosecutor's office, and members of the Hells Angels. At the same time, a further 75 raids and 30 arrests took place in the Netherlands. 10 days later, BlackBerry disconnected Sky ECC from its services. The company effectively ceased to exist. Its website was seized by the FBI, and Jean-François Ypes became the subject of an arrest warrant issued by the US Department of Justice. I spent weeks piecing together the timeline, and this is what I came up with. 3 strikes in a row. EncroChat, June 2020. Sky ECC, March 2021. Anum, June 2021. 3 messaging apps. 3 platforms that positioned themselves as impregnable. All 3 fell within 13 months. The overall result, over 15,000 arrests, tens of tons of drugs, billions in seized assets, hundreds of millions of intercepted messages. On Darknet forums, after June 2021, I read discussions that can be summed up in one word: apocalypse. People wrote that there wasn't a single platform left that could be trusted. Some suggested going back to paper notes, others to face-to-face meetings. Some joked that the only secure messenger was carrier pigeons, but it was no laughing matter, because everyone understood the rules of the game had changed forever. The criminal underworld was crumbling, one messaging app after another. It seemed that the security services had finally found the key to the front door, but all this concerned criminals, drug dealers, arms dealers, people who had chosen this life for themselves. Ordinary people, those who use WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, could sleep soundly. It didn't concern them, or did it? Because the next blow didn't come from the police headquarters. It came from a company that sold its weapons to governments. And the targets weren't criminals. They were journalists, activists, and presidents. 1,400 people, journalists, human rights activists, diplomats, politicians, lawyers, people who had never dealt drugs, organized murders, or gone into hiding from the police, people who simply used WhatsApp, the most popular messaging app on the planet. And all of them, without realizing it, had been infected. When I'd finished piecing together the timeline of the downfall of criminal messaging apps, I thought the worst part of the story was behind me. Phantom, EncroChat, Sky ECC, Anum. Despite their sheer scale, all of these were aimed at criminals. One might argue about the methods, but the objectives were clear. And then I stumbled across material that forced me to rethink everything I knew about messenger security. Because the next chapter of this story isn't about the police versus criminals. It's about governments versus their own citizens. The NSO group was founded in Israel. Its flagship product is the Pegasus software, whereas EncroChat and Sky ECC work by infiltrating servers. Pegasus operates on a fundamentally different principle. It does not require access to the server. It does not need to break encryption. It infects the phone itself, your phone, entirely. The camera, microphone, files, messages in all messaging apps. Everything becomes an open book, and you don't even need to press a single button for this to happen. Let's return to the analogy with the envelope. End-to-end encryption is like a safe into which you place a letter. The safe is secure, the lock is strong. No one can break it open en route. But Pegasus isn't a safecracker. Pegasus is the person standing behind you, reading your letter as you write it before you've put it in the safe. After you've taken it out, encryption is powerless when the enemy is inside your device. In October 2019, WhatsApp filed a lawsuit against the NSO Group in a federal court in California. The statement alleged that the company had exploited a vulnerability in WhatsApp to install Pegasus on the devices of 1,400 users across 20 countries. The scheme was sophisticated. All it took was an incoming call via WhatsApp. The victim didn't even need to answer it. The call triggered the process, the vulnerability allowed spyware to be installed, and within seconds, the phone was completely under control. And then, in July 2021, the Pegasus project was launched. It was an international investigation involving more than 80 journalists from 17 media organizations across 10 countries. The project was coordinated by Forbidden Stories, a Paris-based nonprofit organization. Technical support was provided by Amnesty International's Security Lab. They gained access to a leak containing 50,000 telephone numbers that had been selected as potential targets by NSO Group clients since 2016. 50,000 numbers in more than 50 countries. Among those targeted are heads of state, journalists from leading international publications, human rights activists, opposition politicians, and even people close to Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was murdered at his country's consulate in Istanbul. The NSO Group has always maintained the same position. Pegasus is sold only to governments and intelligence agencies for the purpose of combating terrorism and serious crime. However, the leak revealed otherwise. The program was used far less selectively than its creators had promised. In October 2025, a U.S. federal judge issued a permanent injunction prohibiting the NSO Group from targeting WhatsApp and its users. The same court reduced the punitive damages awarded by the jury to approximately $4 million. For a company with a turnover in the hundreds of millions, this is a drop in the ocean. In November 2021, Apple filed its own lawsuit against the NSO Group, claiming that the spyware had been used against activists, politicians, and journalists, contrary to the company's assurances that its clients target only terrorists. And here's what struck me most of all. Pegasus didn't break the encryption. The encryption worked flawlessly. The Signal protocol used in WhatsApp is one of the best cryptographic systems in the world. It really is impossible to read messages in transit, but what's the point of that if your own phone is a spy? I spent several weeks reading discussions on forums and in private chat rooms. The general tone was something like this: for years, we've been building walls, fitting locks, reinforcing doors. But the enemy came in through a window we hadn't even noticed. And that window is the very device we carry in our pockets 24 hours a day. And then something happened that nobody had expected. On August 24th, 2024, a private jet from Baku landed at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. At around 8 p.m. local time, Pavel Durov, co-founder of Telegram, a messaging app used by over 900 million people worldwide, stepped out of the jet. He was accompanied by a woman and a bodyguard. 2 hours later, he was arrested. The French police were acting on the basis of a warrant issued back in March. Durov, who had held French citizenship since 2021, apparently did not know or did not believe that the warrant was genuine. Investigators would later express their surprise. He knew he was wanted, yet he flew in anyway. On August 28th, he was charged with 12 offenses: aiding and abetting the distribution of child sexual abuse material, facilitating drug trafficking, and refusing to cooperate with the authorities. He was banned from leaving France in order to report regularly to the police in Nice. He faced up to 20 years in prison. The arrest of the head of a major technology platform over content posted by users has been described as unprecedented. A researcher from the University of Toronto described it as an event without parallel in history. Durov himself, speaking on his own platform in September, dismissed the charges as a mistake and stated that holding a company's CEO liable for users' actions was an approach from the pre-digital era. He claimed that the French authorities had not submitted requests in the proper form required by European legislation, and that Telegram's moderation practices met industry standards. During questioning in December 2024, Durov acknowledged that criminal activity on the platform was on the rise and promised to step up content moderation. In November 2025, his travel ban was lifted entirely. He had fully complied with the conditions of his probation over the course of the year. But the Durov case is not just the story of a single arrest. It is a warning, a loud one, a clear one. If the creator of a messaging app with 900 million users can be detained for what happens within his platform, it shifts the balance of power across the entire industry. Every developer, every founder, every investor now knows creating a secure messaging app is not just a technological challenge, it is a legal risk, a personal one. And so we come to the most unpleasant conclusion of this investigation, to the very thing I had been thinking about for several months before I finally plucked up the courage to say it out loud. Encryption works. The Signal protocol is a brilliant piece of technology. The maths behind it is flawless, but the maths only protects the content of the message. And the content is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies the metadata, and that is almost always accessible. Every time you send a message, your messaging app knows who you are, who you're messaging, when, where from, how often, how large the file is, what type of device is being used, which network you're on. All of this is data that isn't encrypted, or is encrypted but stored on the company's servers, or can be requested via a court order, or has already been leaked. One security expert put it this way: metadata is the digital equivalent of an envelope. You've sealed the letter, but the envelope bears the sender's name, the recipient's name, the date, the town, and the postcode. And that's enough to map out your entire life. Who you communicate with, when you sleep, where you work, where you go, and who you love. A real-life case. A U.S. Treasury employee was caught passing classified information to a journalist. Investigators did not need to decrypt a single WhatsApp message. The metadata, timestamps, and the journalist's phone number proved to be sufficient evidence. Another case. The fitness app Strava inadvertently revealed the locations of secret military bases via public heat maps of user activity. No hacking involved. Just metadata. On Darknet forums, after everything that has happened over the last 5 years, I've read discussions whose tone can be summed up in a single word: exhaustion, not panic, not anger. Exhaustion. People wrote, "We've tried everything." Every messaging app that promised protection turned out to be either hacked, sold out, or turned into a trap. One person wrote, "The problem isn't the apps. The problem is that we carry a bug in our pocket and call it a phone." When I began this investigation, I had one question. Is there such a thing as a truly secure messaging app? Now, after months of work, hundreds of documents read, dozens of forum discussions, and a single leaked database that made me question everything, I know the answer. No, it doesn't exist. It's not because the developers are stupid. It's not because the encryption is weak. The Signal protocol is one of the best cryptographic systems ever created by humans. The maths works. The code is robust. The problem isn't with the code. The problem is that security isn't just a lock on the door. It's an entire ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there are far too many points of failure that have nothing to do with encryption. Phantom Secure didn't fail because its code was hacked. It failed because its creator had breakfast in the wrong country. EncroChat didn't fall because its encryption was weak. It fell because its servers were located in a country whose police proved to be more resourceful than expected. SkyECC went down for the same reason. Servers in France, with the Belgian police at the door. Enam wasn't hacked at all. it was a trap from the start. 12,000 devices, 3 years, 27 million messages, and not a single bug. Just human trust used as a weapon. Pegasus doesn't target the messaging app. It targets the device. Even the most sophisticated security measures are useless if someone is standing behind you, reading your screen as you type. And what about metadata? It has always been there, and it always will be, because the very architecture of the internet is built on it. Every data packet carries information about where it came from and where it is going. To remove this would mean rewriting the internet from scratch. Here's the timeline I have put together. 2013, Snowden. The world learns of mass surveillance. 2016, WhatsApp introduces end-to-end encryption. 1 billion people are secure. 2018, Phantom Secure goes under. Criminals are flocking to new platforms. 2020, EncroChat was hacked. 60,000 users were compromised. 2021, Sky ECC has been hacked. 1 billion messages are in the hands of the police. Anom has been exposed as an FBI sting operation. 800 arrests in a week. 2021, the Pegasus Project, 50,000 targets. Journalists, politicians, human rights activists. 2024, Durov's arrest. The founder of the messaging app becomes a target himself. The pattern is relentless. Every messaging app that promised security has, sooner or later, been hacked, compromised, or turned into a weapon. And the intervals between these attacks are getting shorter. What has changed for me personally? I no longer trust any app completely. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I've seen every fortress that was once considered impregnable crumble. I've seen people whose lives depended on privacy lose everything, simply because they trusted an interface with a padlock icon. I'm not telling you to delete all your messaging apps. That's pointless and impossible. What I'm saying is this: remember that the lock icon on your screen is a promise, not a guarantee. Remember that the content of your messages is only a small part of what is known about you. And remember that every time someone tells you that your correspondence is completely secure, ask yourself one question: protected from whom? Right now, you're holding a device that knows where you are, who you're talking to, when you're asleep, and what you're searching for at 3 a.m. It knows more about you than your best friend does. And all of this is just a court order away, or a single Pegasus, or a single server located in the wrong country. The envelope is sealed, but the address is written on it, and someone always reads it. My name is Mr. Dark Web. Take care.